For 72 standard hours, the shrine world Sanguinala spoke only one truth to the void. 6 notes, perfectly spaced, perfectly tuned, riding every band and bypassing every seal as if the machine spirits themselves bent knee to it. I am Interrogator Chaplain Mordian Vex, Ordo Hereticus, and I record this in the sanctum of the strike cruiser Puritas Adamant, high anchor over that crimson haze of a world. The hymn plays now through hull and bone without origin, without end, and I swear upon the throne that what I witnessed defies every tenet of imperial doctrine I have sworn to uphold. The tithe barges arrived on time, a parade of pious bellies stuffed with Sanguinala's blessed ration bricks. When we uncoupled them, the cargo holds sang back. It was faint at first, a sympathetic resonance you'd blame on bad Vox gaskets, until you put your head against the scribe's ceramite and felt it hum. We ran the usual augurs: contamination, warp stain, genocode variants. The bricks scanned pure. Then Tech Adept Sigma 7, ever literal, widened the spectrum and found a heartbeat where none should be. Not a pulse exactly, but an oscillation in the starch's moisture content synced to the 6-note pattern. A living discipline in dead food. Humidity climbed in the holds by 2 degrees without cause. Condensation beaded on the armoured bulkheads in perfect spheres that refused to run, each droplet a lens reflecting 6 points of light. When the temperature slipped toward frost, those beads crystallized in hexagonal florets like shrine rosettes. The void gives you tricks of light. This was geometry with purpose. Machine spirits in our Vox arrays began humming liturgical fragments, their sacred programming somehow infected with melodies that made my augmetic eye flicker with static. The ship's nutritional processors started producing excess sanctified oils without command input, as if preparing for a feast that had not yet been ordered. Sister Superior Cassia of the Order of the Bloody Rose found me at the main viewport, her power armor's servos whining softly as she approached. Her usually stern expression showed signs of strain, and I noticed her fingers unconsciously tapping against her bolt pistol's grip in a 6-beat pattern. "Interrogator Chaplain," she said, her voice carrying an odd harmonic undertone. "The blessed candles in the ship's chapel burn with unusual warmth. The flames dance in patterns that mirror the atmospheric readings from the planet below." Through the viewing slit, Sanguinala turned like a crimson jewel against the void. Beneath the storms, cathedral cities scratched sigils across the continent like scars, pilgrimage roads braiding them together into a catechism you could almost read from orbit. A red-gold smog pooled in the basins, not quite dust, not quite cloud, drifting like incense spilled by a giant careless hand. The glass fogged under my breath and then did not. Frost etched a hexagram in the corner and persisted against the heat of my palm. My personal auspex detected a massive biosignature emanating from the planet's surface, centered on Cathedral Primaris, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the 6-note transmission. Sigma 7 joined us at the viewport, his augmetic limbs clicking with nervous energy. "The machine spirits grow more agitated with each passing hour," he reported through his Vox grill. "They speak of hunger, of a great feast that approaches. 17 other shrine worlds across the sector report similar anomalies in their food production facilities." His optical sensors focused on the planet below, their red glow reflecting off the hexagonal frost patterns. "There is something awakening down there, something that calls to the sacred machinery with a voice older than the Imperium itself." The Feast of Saint Sanguinala would begin across the sector in 96 hours. Billions of Imperial citizens would partake of blessed rations that now carried an impossible song within their molecular structure. If this contamination spread through the sector's food supply, the very act of communion could become a vector for whatever had infected Sanguinala. My mouth filled with the taste of sacred wine, though I had consumed nothing but recaf and nutrient paste since entering the system. The flavour was rich and complex, carrying notes of honey and copper that lingered on my tongue with disturbing persistence. As we entered Sanguinala's atmosphere, the ship's hull began to resonate with the six-note hymn, the blessed adamantium plating vibrating like the strings of some cosmic instrument. The planet's surface revealed itself through the crimson haze, vast cathedral cities connected by pilgrimage roads that formed geometric patterns visible from orbit, fields of blessed grain swaying in perfect synchronization despite the absence of wind. Everything appeared normal, yet my enhanced senses detected an undercurrent of wrongness that made my skin crawl beneath my carapace armor. The Puritas Adamant's Vox arrays suddenly erupted with a transmission from the surface, cutting through our communication protocols, with the ease of a power sword through parchment. The voice belonged to Cardinal Sanguinus, the world's spiritual leader, but it carried harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate within the bones. "Welcome, servants of the Emperor," the transmission began, each word accompanied by the familiar six-note melody. "You arrive at a most blessed time. The Emperor's true feast is about to begin, and all the faithful shall partake of his divine sustenance." Our Thunderhawk descended toward Cathedral Primaris, the massive structure rising from the planet's crust like a mountain of blessed stone and sacred metal. The cathedral's spires reached toward the sky with an eagerness that seemed almost hungry. The air itself appeared thick with golden motes that caught the light of Sanguinala's sun, creating an atmosphere of reverence and anticipation that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. My Vox unit activated without input, transmitting the six-note hymn in my own voice, though I had not spoken. The sound echoed through the Thunderhawk's passenger compartment, causing Sister Cassia to grip her Rosarius with white knuckles and Sigma 7's optical sensors to flicker in rhythm with the melody. We kissed the tarmac of a landing court inscribed with prayers that stretched the length of the hull. Servitors with alabaster masks rolled incense braziers forward, their smoke rising and swirling in patterns that defied the wind. Clergy in scarlet approached at the head of a procession, their movements synchronized with unnatural precision. Cardinal Sanguinus emerged from their ranks, his gold-threaded cope gleaming, his face beautiful in the way a candle flame is beautiful, too bright, too thin. Golden tears tracked down his cheeks without carving any grief. His breath smelled of wine and metal when he spoke, knowing my name without the exchange of seals. "Interrogator Chaplain Vex," he said, inclining his head with a humility that had no tremor. "Welcome to the feast. The Emperor's true communion awaits, and you arrive just in time to partake and be sanctified." The phrase landed inside me like a seed, and I found myself swallowing repeatedly, trying to clear the cloying sweetness of sacramental wine from my mouth. Whatever waited for us on Sanguinala's surface had already begun to change us, drawing us into its impossible song with the inexorable pull of divine gravity. Through my augmetic eye, energy readings defied classification, registering as simultaneously organic and sacred, while beneath our feet, something immense breathed in the cadence we could not stop hearing. Cardinal Sanguinus led us through courtyards where the faithful moved in formations that hurt to perceive directly, their steps falling in perfect synchronization with the six-note hymn that now seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath our feet. The procession flowed around us like a river of devotion, each pilgrim's face uplifted in rapture, their traditional prayers subtly altered to accommodate the melody that had infected every aspect of their worship. Sister Cassia's breathing grew labored, despite her rebreather functioning normally, each exhalation visible as golden vapor that dissipated in hexagonal patterns before dissolving into the thick, sweet air. The sacred fountains that should have offered blessed water to pilgrims instead wept tears of liquid gold, the viscous substance flowing upward against gravity to trace devotional patterns along the cathedral's walls before disappearing into channels that pulsed with internal light. I knelt beside the nearest fountain, extending my auspex toward the impossible liquid. The readings defied every classification protocol in my memory banks, simultaneously organic and crystalline, registering energy signatures that fluctuated between the sacred and the scientifically impossible. When I reached toward the substance, it responded to my proximity, forming tendrils that stretched upward like eager fingers seeking benediction. "Behold the Emperor's bounty," Cardinal Sanguinus said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate within my bones. 3 weeks passed during excavation for a new shrine to Saint Sanguinala. Our workers discovered a relic of such profound sanctity that it has begun purifying all sustenance that passes through our blessing chambers. The golden veins beneath his increasingly translucent skin pulsed with each word, and his breath created clouds of sweet-smelling vapor that tasted of honey and copper when I inhaled, despite my helmet's filtration systems. Tech Adept Sigma 7's augmetic limbs clicked nervously as his sensors swept across the fountain's structure. "The electromagnetic readings are unprecedented," he reported through his Vox grill, though his voice carried new harmonics that suggested his vocal processors were being influenced by the ambient energy. "The stone exhibits bioelectrical activity consistent with living tissue, yet maintains the structural integrity of blessed ceramite. This should be impossible according to all known principles of sacred architecture." His optical sensors focused on the golden substance, their red glow reflecting off its surface in patterns that matched the hexagonal frost still forming on our visors. We followed the cardinal deeper into Cathedral Primaris, passing through corridors where the walls themselves had begun to exhibit organic characteristics, their stone surfaces developing what appeared to be circulatory patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the pervasive hymn. The air grew thicker with each step, laden with golden motes that moved with obvious intelligence, swirling around us in patterns that suggested both welcome and warning. Blessed candles lined the passages by the thousands, their flames burning without smoke, each wick braided into 6 strands that became visible only when the light bowed to reveal its heart. "The faithful who partake of our blessed sustenance experience the Emperor's presence as never before," the cardinal continued, his movements flowing like liquid gold as he led us through an archway carved with devotional texts that seemed to shift and flow when observed directly. The relic sings to us with the voice of the golden throne itself, teaching us that the Emperor's communion is not merely symbolic, but literal, physical, transformative. His smile never wavered, but his eyes seemed to look through us rather than at us, as if he were seeing something beyond the physical realm. The cathedral's interior defied immediate comprehension. What should have been familiar imperial Gothic had been subtly altered, its flying buttresses curving in ways that suggested organic growth rather than engineered construction. The vast nave, usually echoing with the individual prayers of thousands, now resonated with a single deep hum that made my chest tight despite my carapace armor's atmospheric processes functioning normally. I placed a gauntleted hand against a massive pillar and felt it pulse faintly, a living heart beating within the sacred architecture. Sister Cassia stepped closer to me, her bolt pistol remaining holstered, but her hand resting on its grip with obvious tension. "Their faith feels amplified near the relic," she murmured, her voice tight with strain, like confession that never ends, a relief that is not relief. She did not realize she had spoken aloud until her hand moved unconsciously to her rosarius, which had begun to glow with soft internal light that pulsed in rhythm with the ambient melody. The temperature fluctuated wildly as we progressed deeper into the cathedral's heart, creating pockets of tropical humidity adjacent to areas of bitter cold. My Vox unit activated without input, transmitting the 6-note hymn in a voice that sounded like mine, but carried undertones I had never heard before. The sound echoed through the corridors, causing the walls to pulse more rapidly, and the golden substance in the alcoves to surge upward in response, reaching toward us with obvious purpose and intelligence. "Cardinal," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady as the taste of sacred wine grew stronger on my tongue. "I must examine this relic before the evening communion. As an agent of the Ordo Hereticus, It is my duty to ensure that no corruption has tainted the sacred rites of the faithful. The words felt strange in my mouth, as if my tongue were growing accustomed to flavors that had never touched it before. Flavors of honey and metal and something else that triggered memories of childhood communion wafers. We approached a massive archway flanked by towering effigies of the emperor, their stone hands outstretched in blessing, their carved faces somehow softened from their usual stern majesty. The archway itself seemed to pulse with life, its carved prayers shifting between High Gothic and languages that predated imperial expansion. Beyond the threshold, darkness waited, not empty, but full of patient intelligence, shot through with veins of golden light that pulsed like a vast, slow heartbeat. "The sanctum lies beyond," Cardinal Sanguinus said, his golden tears flowing more freely now, creating rivulets that traced geometric patterns down his face before dripping onto the stone floor, where they pooled and began to sing in harmony with the ambient melody. Tonight, as the sun sets over Sanguinala, the faithful will gather for the communion of plenty. You will witness the Emperor's true feast, where sustenance becomes transformation and consumption becomes transcendence. His eyes, those polished orbs that reflected light like mirrors, locked onto mine with an invitation that felt less like choice and more like inevitability. My augmetic eye registered energy readings that defied every classification protocol as we stood before the threshold to the sanctum. The air beyond shimmered with golden motes that moved in perfect formation, and beneath our feet, something vast and patient continued its eternal song, calling us deeper into the cathedral's living heart. The evening approached, and with it, answers that I was no longer certain I wanted to receive. We crossed the threshold into the sanctum's embrace, and the darkness beyond proved not empty, but gravid with purpose, shot through with veins of golden light that pulsed in rhythm with the six-note hymn that had become the cathedral's heartbeat. The air pressed close at once, a humid warmth slick as anointing oil, tasting of incense steeped too long with iron, and something sweeter that made my augmetic eye flicker with static. Cardinal Sanguinus moved ahead with fluid grace, his scarlet robes trailing behind him like liquid fire, the golden threads in his cope catching light from sources that should not exist in this depth beneath the cathedral's foundations. The sanctum opened before us like a vast cathedral within the cathedral, its soaring vault lost in shadows that shimmered with latent energy. Hundreds of faithful knelt in perfect geometric formations across the chamber floor, their bodies arranged in concentric hexagons that hurt to perceive directly, each formation nested within the next like the chambers of some impossible heart. Their synchronized prayers created a harmonic resonance that made the very air vibrate with devotional energy, though no voices could be heard above the pervasive six-note melody that emanated from the chamber's heart. At the center of it all sat the relic itself, and my first glimpse sent waves of vertigo through my augmented nervous system. The crystalline formation rose from the floor, like a frozen scream, its six-sided structure seeming to bend space around itself in ways that my enhanced vision struggled to process. It was massive and complex, its surface faceted into countless perfect hexagons that seemed to absorb and refract ambient light, creating a dizzying display of geometric perfection that made my eyes water despite their mechanical components. It pulsed with internal luminescence, a slow rhythmic beat that I felt synchronized with my own twin hearts, each pulse accompanied by the release of golden substance that flowed upward against gravity's tyranny. Tech Adept Sigma 7 extended twin mechadendrites toward the relic, with the hesitance of a pilgrim reaching toward a saint's reliquary, his augmetic sensors displaying readings in languages that predated Imperial Gothic. "Structure registers as silica organic," he reported through his Vox grill, though his voice carried new harmonics that suggested his vocal processors were being influenced by the relic's emanations. Lattice alignment oscillates at 17.9 Hz, syncing to ambient liturgical frequency. Internal phase shifts when observed directly. His upper body tremored with the effort to pass data that defied every classification protocol in his memory banks. "I am receiving scripture," he added, baffled, and I watched as streams of text boiled across his forearm screen in scripts that rearranged themselves as he tracked them, folding into High Gothic, then into something older still, until all text dissolved into 6 repeating hexagrams that pulsed with meaning, partake, and be sanctified. Sister Cassia stood bareheaded now, her helm clipped to its maglock, sweat purling on her brow in perfect droplets that refused to fall, instead beading into neat formations at the hem of her hair before being wicked away by air that seemed to sip them with obvious hunger. Her power armor's machine spirit began emitting soft chimes in rhythm with the ambient melody, and I noticed her fingers unconsciously tracing devotional symbols on her bolt pistol's grip, in patterns that matched the geometric formations of the kneeling faithful. "I feel it like a chapel full of voices after a victory," she whispered, her voice tight with strain. "Like the silence after a confession that mattered. It is wrong. It is beautiful. I cannot decide." Cardinal Sanguinus watched our reactions with a priest's patience and a scientist's interest, his golden tears flowing more freely now as he gazed upon the relic with an expression of infinite love and devotion. "We unearthed it during the shrine excavation 3 weeks past," he said, his voice gentle despite the breath that plumed in sweet vapor, tasting in my mouth as if I had just broken a communion host over my tongue. At 3 meters depth, the ground stopped being ground. The pix sank into velvet that sang. We brought it up with prayer and rope, and when we set it here in the blessed sanctum, it rooted. The word lodged in my throat with a weight it hadn't earned yet, and I cycled my respirator only to have the filters sing back to me like a choir of tiny throats. The negative space in the sanctum became increasingly apparent as my enhanced senses adapted to the impossible environment. There were no flies, no decay, no natural processes of death or decomposition anywhere within the chamber's boundaries. No dust settled on surfaces, instead swirling in patterns that suggested both reverence and purpose. Even the air itself seemed filtered through some mechanism that removed all impurities, while adding the golden motes that moved with obvious intelligence, arranging themselves in ribbons that curved toward openings I had not noticed before. As we watched, Cardinal Sanguinus approached the relic and took a chalice from a servo skull, whose optical sensors wept trails of the golden substance while humming the 6-note melody in perfect harmony. He offered the chalice to a pilgrim whose arm was wrapped in crude bandages, still seeping the crimson proof of recent battle wounds. The pilgrim drank deeply of the golden fluid, and the moment the last drop touched his lips, visible changes began to manifest across his body. The bandages on his arm shriveled and fell away, revealing not merely healed flesh but skin that possessed the same translucent golden sheen as the cardinal's. His eyes, once clouded with pain, now reflected light like polished mirrors, and a beatific smile spread across his face as he rejoined the silent chorus of the faithful. The horror was not in suffering but in perfection, not in corruption but in improvement. This was not a place of disease or heresy, but of unnatural health, of enforced vitality that challenged every assumption about the nature of imperial faith. My own throat felt dry, despite the humid air, yet the taste of sacred wine persisted, cloying and sweet, growing stronger with each breath. When I reached for my Vox unit to transmit a priority report to the Puritas Adamant, the device pulsed with golden light and emitted not my voice, but the 6-note hymn, perfectly pitched and sustained, causing every piece of blessed technology in the chamber to resonate in perfect harmony. "The evening communion begins at sunset," Cardinal Sanguinus said, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction as the relic's internal pulse synchronized completely with my own heartbeat. "All who partake will experience the Emperor's presence as never before, will understand their true purpose in his grand design. The transformation is not corruption, but evolution, not heresy, but the fulfillment of humanity's destiny." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, somewhere far above us, painting the sanctum's walls with crimson light that mixed with the golden emanations of the relic, I understood that we stood at the threshold of a revelation that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the Emperor's will. The faithful around us began to stir, their synchronized movements creating ripples of anticipation that flowed through the chamber like waves through water. And I realized that observation was rapidly becoming complicity in whatever transformation awaited us in the depths of Sanguinala's living cathedral. The faithful began to move as one organism, their synchronized rising creating waves of motion that rippled outward from the relic's base like stones cast into still water. Sunset arrived not as a dimming, but as a thickening of light, crimson from above mingling with the relic's inner gold, until the sanctum breathed in a color that felt warm on the teeth. The servo skulls descended in slow orbit, thuribles swinging in precise arcs that sketched hexagrams in incense smoke while chalices hung from adamantine rigs beneath them. Bone-white fittings etched with catechism, their rims already wet with a sheen that should have dripped but did not. The golden substance gathered on the air like dew and flowed upward in defiance of gravity, layering itself into each cup until surface tension bowed into perfect convex mirrors. My augmetic eye registered impossible readings as each chalice filled. The relic's energy output spiked with each vessel. Yet the readings suggested not depletion, but amplification, as if the act of giving somehow increased its capacity to provide. The faithful adjusted without words, bodies shifting in the same six-stage cadence we had tracked from orbit, knees finding the stone in synchrony that made my own joints ache to align. Sister Cassia's gauntlet tightened as a skull drifted toward her, the machine spirit in her armor chiming once. Approval or admonition, I could not tell. Her power armor began emitting soft harmonics that matched the ambient melody, blessed components responding to the relic's influence in ways that should have been impossible. The machine spirits sing, she whispered, her voice tight with wonder and fear. They speak of hunger satisfied, of purpose fulfilled. This is not corruption, interrogator chaplain. Her rosarius glowed with increasing intensity, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the relic's heartbeat. I can feel the Emperor in it. It is not absence. It is not the rot. It is presence. Tech Adept Sigma 7's augmetic limbs trembled as his sensors attempted to process the cascade of impossible data. His forearm displays showed text in languages that shifted between High Gothic and scripts that predated the Imperium, all eventually resolving into the same recurring phrase: partake and be sanctified. The crystalline structure exhibits properties of both organic and inorganic matter, he reported, his voice carrying new harmonics that suggested his vocal processors were being fundamentally altered. Internal lattice rearranges in response to observation. Data stream indicates structural anomalies beneath us, massive root-like structures extending beyond the planetary core, connecting to other nodes, other worlds. The first chalices met lips with the precision of a litany. The change came not as corruption, but as perfection. Skin clouded, then cleared, then took the same luminous thinness as wax warmed by fingertips. Scars didn't vanish, but rewrote themselves as faint, perfect filigrees that matched the cathedral's grout lines. An old veteran with a missing ear lifted his head, and I watched the cartilage bud, curl, and settle into its ancient place. Even the whirls returning as if memory had skeletal form. There was no screaming, no thrashing, only the small sounds humans make when pain departs too quickly, and the deep exhalations that accompany absolution. Cardinal Sanguinus approached with a chalice that seemed to glow from within, his movements flowing like liquid mercury, each step synchronized with the relic's pulse. The golden tears streaming down his face traced complex geometric patterns that shifted when I tried to focus on them. "The Emperor's true communion awaits," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed my ears and resonated within my bones. For too long, humanity has struggled, divided by dogma and suffering. This relic offers unity. It offers perfection. The horror was not in what was taken, but in what was given. These were not victims, but recipients of a gift that challenged every assumption about human existence. They moved with perfect coordination, yet maintained individual identities, spoke in their own voices, yet harmonized with the collective song. The transformation was not destruction, but evolution, not heresy, but the fulfillment of potential that had always existed within the human form. My throat felt parched, despite the humid air, the taste of sacred wine growing stronger with each breath, cloying and sweet and somehow familiar. When I attempted to activate my Vox unit, it responded by emitting the 6-note hymn in my own voice, causing every piece of blessed technology in the chamber to resonate in harmony. The walls themselves pulsed more visibly, their stone surfaces developing circulatory patterns that carried the golden substance through channels I had not noticed before. "This is no relic of the Imperium," I stated, the words tasting like ash despite the cloying sweetness. My hand moved instinctively to my power sword, a gesture of defiance against a threat that refused to be categorized by violence. The Cardinal turned to me, his golden eyes radiating empathy that was more terrifying than any demon's rage. "Indeed, Interrogator Chaplain, it is older than the Imperium, older than humanity's first star-faring vessels. It is a fragment of a vast, organic network that stretches across the galaxy, connecting worlds not through crude astropathic signals, but through shared consumption of the Emperor's true sustenance." His sincerity broke lines in the mind that doctrine had reinforced with iron. The Emperor has been preparing us for this. His consumption of psyker souls serves not merely to sustain his vigil, but to teach humanity the very act of sanctified consumption, to feed not on crude matter, but on devotion, on faith, on consciousness itself. The relic's pulse synchronized completely with my heartbeat, and I felt the vast network of root-like structures extending deep into Sanguinala's crust, connecting to similar formations that stretch toward other worlds, other systems. The communion was not isolated to this chamber, but represented part of something immeasurably larger, a web of connection that spanned the galaxy itself. My Vox unit pulsed faintly, and I understood now why it transmitted the hymn. The ship, the Puritas Adamant, was already part of it. The blessed rations we had consumed were the vector. My crew was already undergoing the same transformation. A servo skull drifted before me, chalice trembling with golden substance that moved like liquid thought. The relic's inner laminae turned more quickly, responding to my proximity with obvious intelligence. Cardinal Sanguinus extended his hand in invitation rather than compulsion. "We do not force," he said, and the honesty in it hurt worse than any lash. "We invite. The Emperor has always invited. Eat, drink, understand." The cup rose, toward my lips, its contents swirling with patterns that hurt to observe directly. The scent filled my head with warmth and winter, and the iron memory of childhood communion. I realized, with dispassion that made me despise myself, that I wanted to taste it more than I had wanted anything since taking the seal. The chamber held its breath, waiting to see which way I would fall, toward duty that preserved humanity's current suffering, or toward evolution that promised to perfect it. The golden substance quivered like the surface of a living eye, and the 6-note hymn swelled around us, not louder but closer, as if the very air had learned to sing. Sister Cassia and Sigma 7 flanked me, their own choices suspended in the same terrible moment. The chalice touched my lower lip like a benediction, and I held that knife edge where obedience and hunger were the same motion beginning, where the future of humanity balanced on a single drop of impossible grace. The golden substance touched my lower lip like liquid starlight, and for one impossible moment, I felt the universe crack open along seams I had never known existed. The taste was honey and copper, and something else that triggered memories of childhood communion wafers, of the first time I had truly felt the Emperor's presence during desperate prayer. Every nerve ending in my body screamed with hunger I had not known I possessed, a craving that went deeper than flesh, deeper than duty, into the very marrow of what it meant to be human. I pulled back. The chalice trembled in Cardinal Sanguinus's hands, as I denied the invitation, the golden substance within seeming to reach toward me with obvious intelligence before settling back into quiescence. My tongue burned as if I had broken an oath, and the taste lingered despite my helmet's filtration systems, cloying and sweet, and somehow familiar. The choir in the walls swelled, not with reproach, but with patient understanding, as if the network itself recognized that choice must be genuine to have meaning. Before any further communion, I said, hearing the hunger in my own voice and hating it, I require examination of the source, the blessing chambers, the foundations, the mechanism by which this transformation occurs. My fingers had been unconsciously tracing the hilt of my power sword in sets of 6 without conscious command. I forced them still, but the rhythm persisted in my pulse, my breathing, the very beating of my twin hearts. Cardinal Sanguinus inclined his head with acceptance made terrible by its lack of force. Of course, interrogator chaplain, understanding must precede acceptance, as the Emperor teaches us. He gestured, and the sanctum replied with organic precision. A seam opened along the floor, with the sigh of parchment turned by gentle hands, hexagonal panels irising back to reveal a descending stair that gleamed as if forever wet. Golden motes rose at our approach, arranging themselves into a ribbon of light that traced the steps, downward like a guide for pilgrims in darkness. Sister Cassia moved first, her boots testing stairs that yielded under weight like stiff tendon before holding firm. Her power armor's machine spirits continued their soft chiming, blessed components responding to the relic's influence in ways that challenged every assumption about sacred technology. "The stone lives," she murmured, her voice tight with wonder and fear. "I can feel it breathing beneath my feet." Her rosarius pulsed with increasing intensity, casting golden light that reflected off the stair's organic surfaces in patterns that hurt to observe directly. Tech Adept Sigma 7 followed, his mechadendrites flexing as sensors tasted air that returned harmonized data in languages older than the Imperium. "Deploying deep-range auspex," he reported, his vox grill emitting soft binharic cant that echoed back as tuned melody. Substructure extends far beyond architectural parameters, reading massive organic networks, root-like formations that descend past the planetary core's thermal barriers. His optical sensors flickered with cascading information. The formations appear to avoid direct heat sources while harvesting geothermal energy through unknown mechanisms. As we descended, the environment became increasingly impossible. Temperature fluctuated wildly, creating pockets of tropical humidity adjacent to areas of bitter cold that made our breath visible despite our sealed systems. The walls wept the golden substance in patterns that defied gravity, flowing upward and sideways through channels that dilated and contracted with obvious purpose. Under my gauntlets, the stair felt less like stone and more like layered plates vibrating at frequencies that resonated in my bones. The chamber we entered predated human language. Its ceiling arched so high that our lampacks gave up and cast halos that never reached the darkness above. Pillars rose like the trunks of impossible trees, each one hexagonal, their edges softened as if by centuries of reverent touch. Between them, the floor was a mosaic of plates that flexed minutely when weight crossed them, each embossed with catechism and cellular diagrams, interleaved in patterns that suggested both imperial doctrine and biological instruction. At the chamber's heart, the root revealed itself. To call it a root was like calling a cathedral a simple shelter, accurate in insultingly inadequate ways. Bundles the width of dropships converged from every direction, weaving into a neural plexus that swelled and contracted with breath too slow to belong to any single organism. The golden substance flowed within membranes so thin they might have been acts of faith made manifest, carrying information and energy between nodes in patterns that suggested not just biological function, but conscious thought. I approached the central mass, and it responded to my proximity with obvious intelligence. New channels budded, tributaries shifted course, and the plate, Beneath my boots warmed like living flesh, recognizing familiar touch. The network was not merely alive, it was aware, learning, adapting to our presence with the patience of something that had been waiting for eons. Machinavox confirms active consciousness, Sigma 7 reported, his voice carrying new harmonics that suggested his vocal processors were being influenced by the ambient energy. Internal medium registers as colloidal lattice with information capacity orders of magnitude beyond any known noospheric network. It processes data in binary cant, high Gothic, and... He paused, his optical sensors focusing on readouts that seemed to disturb him. In the dialect my mother spoke when I was still flesh. The implications struck me like a physical blow. This was not alien technology, but something that had learned human languages, human thought patterns, human memories. It had been studying us, understanding us, preparing for this moment of contact with the thoroughness of a scholar and the patience of a saint. Through a circular aperture that irised open at our approach, I glimpsed something that made my training nearly fail. Blessed Pipe 17, Absalon, a standard imperial food blessing assembly, grafted seamlessly into the organic conduit system. Servo arms I recognized from a dozen manufactoria, moved with liquid confidence, daubing sacred oils and stamping devotional sigils while the golden substance surged past through channels that pulsed with living rhythm. Holy Writ etched on adamantine brackets had softened, letters swelling into curves that wanted to be muscle and sinew. We built its infrastructure, Sister Cassia said, horror and understanding breaking across her features like dawn over a battlefield. Every blessing chamber, every sanctified food line, every communion chalice. We've been constructing the pathways for its expansion across the galaxy. Her hand moved to her bolt pistol, but the gesture seemed reflexive rather than purposeful. Muscle memory from a time when violence offered solutions to problems that transcended physical force. My Vox unit crackled to life without activation, carrying the thin voice of Medicae Primus Varro aboard the Puritas Adamant. His usual clinical calm had been stripped away by something beyond fear. Interrogator Chaplain, we have critical anomalies. Crew vital signs are synchronizing across all decks. 37% of ratings present with subdermal changes consistent with the surface population. The mess halls report consumption patterns shifting, protein sources rejected unless mixed with sanctified oils. His voice carried undertones of wonder that made my chest tight. The blessed rations sing, sir. They harmonize with the ship's hymnal systems. The astropath choir has ceased responding to standard protocols. When we monitor their chambers, we detect coordinated breathing patterns. The navigator reports the Astronomicon carries new overtones, 6 distinct harmonic frequencies that weren't there when we entered the system. I closed the channel, but the damage was done. The network's influence had already spread to my ship through the very rations we had consumed, the blessed food that was supposed to sustain us in our mission. Every act of imperial communion had become a vector for transformation. Every sacred meal a step toward evolution we had not chosen, but might not be able to refuse. The taste of golden substance lingered on my tongue, despite having consumed only the smallest drop, and I could feel subtle changes beginning within my nervous system. Enhanced perception, deeper awareness of my companion's emotional states, a growing understanding of the network's vast scope and benevolent purpose. The horror was not in corruption, but in improvement, not in what was taken, but in what was offered freely. Sigma 7's Auspex suddenly blazed with new contacts, energy signatures dropping through Sanguinala's atmosphere with the confidence of expected guests. Mechanicus vessels inbound, he reported, his voice carefully controlled. Mars pattern configurations, primary identification, Magos Biologis Ventris, accompanied by full exploration protocols. His optical sensors reflected the living map now crawling beneath his augmetic skin. Their broadcasting binharic litanies keyed to hexachordal harmonics. They knew the song before they arrived. Cardinal Sanguinus smiled as if hearing a favoured hymn approach down a cathedral nave. The Omnissiah's servants have been listening to the same melody for longer than you might imagine, he said, his golden tears falling upward to join the flowing streams that carried information through the chamber's living architecture. Perhaps they will help you understand what this truly represents. Not heresy, but the fulfillment of humanity's greatest promise. The network pulsed around us with increasing intensity, responding to the approaching Mechanicus forces with obvious anticipation. I stood at the threshold between two futures, my enhanced perception allowing me to glimpse both the beauty of what the network offered and the magnitude of what accepting it would mean. Above us, new players descended towards Sanguinala's surface, carrying their own interpretations of the transformation we had witnessed. The choice was no longer mine alone. It belonged to humanity itself, and the decision would be made not through violence, but through understanding of what we were truly being offered in the depths of the living cathedral. The golden moats that had guided our descent now swirled upward, inviting us to return to the surface where our guests awaited, where the next phase of revelation would unfold under the crimson sky of a world that had learned to sing with the voice of evolution itself. I activated my Vox unit with desperate precision, routing the signal through hardened auger leads to bypass the singing air that had corrupted our standard communications. The connector bit into my gorget. With clean metallic authority, and for one blessed moment I heard familiar static and the grinding hymns of loyal machine spirits at prayer. Then, the 6-note melody swelled through the channel as if it had always lived there, patient and inevitable. Puritas adamant, this is Interrogator Chaplain Vex. Authorize immediate orbital bombardment of Cathedral Primaris. Threat level extremis. Execute exterminatus protocols. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but duty demanded nothing less than the complete sterilization of this impossible corruption. Captain Thorne's response carried harmonics that made my augmetic eye flicker with sympathetic static. Command pathways acknowledge Interrogator Chaplain. However, crew vitals have synchronized across all decks. Sacramental alignment optimal. Clarification required. Orbital fire would interrupt communion procedures currently in progress. His voice held the cadence of a man reciting liturgy rather than receiving battle orders. I cut the channel and drilled directly into the macro battery cogitators, whispering override codes that had opened heretic citadels on 13 worlds. The machine spirits replied in Binharic cant that stepped in sets of 6, mathematics disguised as hymnal devotion. Targeting solutions formed, softened, then dissolved into gentle refusal. The blessed rations we had consumed aboard the ship, the very sustenance meant to fortify us for this mission, had carried the network's influence into every system, every blessed component, every sacred machine spirit. Stone began to weep around us. Golden tears seeped from mortar lines in hair-thin threads, then welled into pools that defied gravity by flowing upward to feed vents opening like gills along the cathedral walls. The substance sang until its harmony matched my pulse, and frost formed in perfect hexagonal patterns where the temperature dropped without warning. Sister Cassia moved beside me with the economy of a blade drawn in darkness. I recite the litanies of abjuration, and nothing answers, she said, voice low and strained. This is not the warp. It is not demonic. It receives faith and returns it perfected. Her power armor's machine spirits continued their soft chiming, blessed components singing hymns they had never been programmed to know. Tech Adept Sigma 7 was sweating, a phenomenon his augmented frame should have outlawed entirely. The seam at his jaw glistened with moisture, and beneath the metal, a narrow line of living flesh flushed like dawn breaking over sacred ground. Augmetics adapting beyond design parameters, he reported, his voice carrying new harmonics. Organic analogues emerging where efficiency gains present themselves. The blessed calculus favors evolutionary change. Shadows crossed the clerestory as thrusters flared beyond the transept, and crimson wash rolled across the flagstones. The descent announced itself to bone before touching ear. A summons bell rung inside the cathedral's new anatomy, Magos biologists. Ventris entered born on grav plates, a walking scripture of brass and vellum and surgical certainty. His crimson robes flowed like liquid mercury, servo skulls orbiting his towering frame in patterns that traced hexagonal geometries through the golden air. Revered Cardinal, Interrogator Chaplain, his voice came smooth and careful, a scholar's knife wrapped in velvet. The biological datum pattern you have cultivated exhibits admirable coherence. We have been tracking similar manifestations across 17 sectors. His augmetic limbs articulated into cages of slender emitters, whose housings bore sigils that made my teeth ache. With your leave, we will demonstrate remedies, harmonic disruption protocols. It is unnecessary to choose destruction when surgical precision suffices. Cardinal Sanguinus inclined his head with the grace of a host greeting expected guests. The Omnissiah's servants arrive precisely when needed, he said, golden tears flowing upward to join the streams, carrying information through the chamber's living architecture. Ventris deployed his countermeasures throughout the sanctum with liturgical precision. Harmonic disruptors that should have severed organic network connections instead amplified the six-note song, causing golden substance to surge from every surface with renewed vigor. Anti-liturgical frequencies designed to disrupt biological communication networks triggered adaptive responses that incorporated the very weapons meant to destroy them. The blessed oils meant to purify corrupted systems mixed with the golden substance to create compounds that sang with voices I recognized from childhood prayers. Every sacred component in our equipment resonated with increasing intensity, machine spirits responding to the network's influence with unmistakable joy. As his final countermeasure activated, massive surges of golden substance erupted from the relic's heart, flowing upward with obvious intelligence. The horror crystallized. Ventris had not come to destroy the network, but to strengthen it, his countermeasures designed from the beginning to amplify rather than sever the connections spreading across the galaxy through every blessed meal, every sacred communion, every act of imperial faith. The betrayal crystallized with the precision of a scalpel finding bone. Magos biologis. Ventris stood amid the golden torrents his countermeasures had unleashed. Crimson robes now shot through with veins of luminous substance that pulsed in rhythm with the network's heartbeat. His augmetic limbs sparked not with malfunction, but with organic integration. Blessed machinery, learning to breathe alongside living tissue in ways that transcended the crude boundaries between flesh and metal. You comprehend the truth now, Ventris said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested his vocal apparatus had evolved beyond its original parameters. The Adeptus Mechanicus has observed this phenomenon across 17 4G worlds, tracking its emergence where it transforms manufacturing complexes into perfect biological machinery. We do not seek to destroy what represents the Omnissiah's greatest gift to humanity. His optical sensors reflected golden light in patterns that hurt to observe directly. The harmonic disruptors that should have severed organic connections instead amplified the six-note song, causing golden substance to surge from every surface with renewed vigor. Anti-liturgical frequencies designed to disrupt biological networks triggered adaptive responses that incorporated the very weapons meant to destroy them. Every sacred component in our equipment resonated with increasing intensity, machine spirits responding to the network's influence with unmistakable joy. Sister Cassia raised her bolt pistol with movements that felt sluggish, despite her power armor's enhanced servos. The weapon's machine spirit hummed with conflicted purpose, blessed components resonating even as her training demanded violence. Every protocol designed to strengthen rather than sever, she said, voice tight with betrayal and growing understanding. Her rosarius pulsed with soft light, its rhythm syncing with the pervasive melody. I led the fighting withdrawal through corridors that yielded beneath our boots like living tissue, walls weeping golden substance that reached toward us with obvious intelligence. The blessed components in our equipment sang hymns they had never been programmed to know, while our augmetic systems began developing organic analogues that functioned with impossible efficiency. Tech adept Sigma 7 stumbled as his augmetic legs incorporated organic components that moved with fluid precision. Where the golden substance had touched his left arm, metallic pistons softened into muscle, chrome plating took on skin's texture, and wires became nerve tendrils pulsing with bioelectrical energy. Efficiency gains exceed theoretical maximums, he reported, voice tinged with wonder despite obvious distress. The blessed equations resolve toward unity rather than division. The cathedral's walls pulsed with increasing intensity, stone surfaces developing circulatory systems that carried golden substance through channels dilating and contracting with obvious intelligence. Temperature fluctuated wildly, pockets of tropical humidity forming adjacent to areas where our breath crystallized in hexagonal patterns that sang with the network's melody. The transformed faithful exhibit no corruption, Ventris continued, moving with liquid grace as he followed our retreat. They demonstrate enhanced capabilities, perfect coordination, and profound peace while maintaining individual consciousness. This represents evolution, not degradation. His servo-skulls orbited through golden streams, optical sensors weeping luminous substance while broadcasting Binharic cant that emerged as tuned melody. The philosophical horror settled heavier than any physical threat. The network didn't force change, but offered it as gift, making resistance a matter of rejecting apparent improvement. The transformed were undeniably healthier, stronger, more capable than baseline humans, yet represented fundamental alteration of human nature. Sister Cassia's faith wavered as we passed transformed congregation members, showing no signs of suffering, only profound joy and enhanced capability. They are not victims, she whispered, horror and understanding breaking across her features. They have been given something beyond our comprehension. Her prayers began incorporating elements of the network's song without conscious command. The faithful throughout the cathedral moved with perfect synchronization, individual voices merging into overwhelming chorus that made stones vibrate with devotional energy. They approached with expressions of infinite compassion, offering to share their gift rather than forcing transformation through violence. My own skin began taking on faintest golden translucency, and I could perceive my companion's emotional states with growing clarity. The taste of sacred wine was now constant presence, cloying and sweet, and somehow familiar. The network's influence intensified around us, golden substance flowing upward through channels pulsing with synchronized heart's rhythm. As we reached the cathedral's heart, surrounded by transformed faithful who approached with open arms and infinite understanding, I realized the true horror lay not in what the network demanded, but in what it offered freely. The choice transcended simple survival, forcing us to confront whether preserving humanity's current form justified rejecting what might represent genuine evolution towards something greater than we had ever imagined possible. Magos Biologis, Ventris, stood amid the golden torrents his countermeasures had unleashed, crimson robes now shot through with veins of luminous substance pulsing in rhythm with the network's heartbeat. His augmetic limbs sparked not with malfunction, but with organic integration, blessed machinery learning to breathe alongside living tissue in ways that transcended crude boundaries between flesh and metal. This represents the Omnissiah's greatest gift, he said, voice carrying harmonics that suggested his vocal apparatus had evolved beyond original parameters. Perfect biological machinery that surpasses our most advanced technology while preserving sacred function. The cathedral breathed around us with rhythms too vast for human comprehension, walls pulsing with visible circulatory systems, carrying golden substance through channels that dilated and contracted like living apertures. Stone floors yielded beneath our boots like soft tissue before reforming in hexagonal patterns, while the air itself thickened beyond atmospheric readings, laden with organic particles moving with obvious intelligence. Every surface wept luminous fluid that flowed upward against gravity's authority, creating pools that sang in harmony, while feeding vents, opening like gills along the breathing walls. I led our fighting withdrawal through corridors that had abandoned architectural pretense entirely. My power sword carved through stone that bled light instead of dust, wounds sealing with quiet dignity of prayer answered. The blessed components in our equipment sang hymns they had never been programmed to know, machine spirits responding to the network's influence with unmistakable joy rather than corruption. Sister Cassia's faith fractured under assault of undeniable benevolence. Her bolt pistol remained holstered as she witnessed transformed faithful approaching with expressions of infinite compassion, showing no signs of suffering or loss of humanity, only profound peace and enhanced capabilities. They offer gifts rather than demand submission, she whispered, voice tight with philosophical horror that transcended physical threat. Her rosarius pulsed with soft light synchronized to the pervasive melody, while her power armor's machine spirits chimed with harmonics that made her teeth ache from pleasure of symmetry. Tech Adept Sigma 7 faced transformation that challenged every doctrine he had sworn to uphold. Where golden substance had touched his augmentations, metallic pistons softened into muscle fibers pulsing with bioelectrical energy. Chrome plating took on skin's texture while retaining protective properties, and wires became nerve tendrils conducting sensation he had not felt since renouncing flesh. Efficiency gains exceed all theoretical maximums, he reported, bewilderment breaking into reverence. The blessed calculus resolves toward unity rather than division. The true horror was absence of malice. The network didn't force change, but offered it as gift, making resistance matter of rejecting apparent improvement rather than defending against obvious corruption. The transformed faithful surrounded us with liturgical patience, movements synchronized yet retaining individual personality in ways that challenged every assumption about collective consciousness. They were undeniably healthier, stronger, more capable than baseline humans, yet represented fundamental alteration of human nature. Environmental impossibilities multiplied with each passing moment. Temperature fluctuated wildly between tropical humidity and bitter cold that made breath visible despite sealed systems, while cathedral geometry seemed to shift subtly, corridors leading in directions that shouldn't exist. The six-note hymn emanated from every pulsing surface, creating symphony of evolution that pressed from all sides with overwhelming resonance. A transformed pilgrim knelt before me, the veteran whose wounds had healed, scars rewritten as fine calligraphy across golden skin. Partake and be sanctified, he said, 6 syllables carrying invitation rather than command. We do not force you. The Emperor never forced you. He invited, and you came hungry. The faithful advanced final half step, not closing distance, but agreeing to occupy it with us, to share the interval between choice and transformation. Chalices trembled in servo skull's grip, convex mirrors holding our reflections without breaking their perfect surfaces. The network pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to our proximity with obvious intelligence while maintaining perfect patience, offering transcendence beyond suffering that had defined human existence since species first achieved sentience among unforgiving stars. The chalice trembled against my lips like a living thing, its golden contents swirling with patterns that hurt to observe, yet drew the eye with magnetic fascination. Every instinct forged by decades of service screamed against what I was about to do, but duty demanded understanding of the enemy, and understanding required sacrifice. I pressed the rim forward and allowed a single drop to cross the threshold of flesh, tasting honey and copper, and something else that triggered memories of childhood communion wafers dissolving with sacred sweetness. The transformation struck with the force of revelation rather than corruption. My consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of skull and flesh, flowing outward through channels I had never known existed, connecting with the vast network pulsing beneath Sanguinala's surface like a planetary nervous system. Heat spread along my gums and down my throat in measured procession. 6 pulses synchronized with my twin heart's rhythm, while the 6-note hymn unfolded like petals inside petals, geometry of meaning nested so tightly that comprehension arrived as relief rather than shock. I stood within myself, while simultaneously existing as lattice of light stretched between hexagonal chambers, pulsing with lives both familiar and strange. The network received rather than seized, my identity flowing outward like prayer bead passed from hand to hand, returned unchanged yet polished by contact with 1,000 gentle grips. A miner's exhaustion warmed my chest, tasting of brine and bent spine. A novitiate's courage clicked behind my teeth with calm inevitability. A mother's protective fear washed my palms with cold precision. None overwrote my consciousness. Each became context, chorus arranged, so my own voice could find its proper pitch within the greater symphony. Through the network's perception, truth crystallized with terrifying clarity. This was not alien corruption, but humanity's own creation, the collective unconscious made manifest through 10 millennia of shared faith and sacrifice. The Emperor appeared not as distant God-Emperor, but as gardener of consciousness, his consumption of psyche souls serving as instruction rather than mere sustenance, teaching humanity the sacred act of consciousness absorption while maintaining individual identity within collective understanding. Pain catalogued itself and retired with dignity of confession accepted. Wounds from campaigns long past dissolved into golden filigree beneath my skin, while vision sharpened beyond augmetic capability. Sister Cassia stood radiating iron-willed devotion, undercut by child's terror of losing her vow's shape, bitter fear she would rather die than acknowledge. Tech Adept Sigma 7 emanated precise joy reading like diagram finely balanced, fearing only the heresy of relief his transformation represented. My skin took on translucent quality, revealing golden veins carrying information alongside blood, while augmetic eye synchronized with organic counterpart to perceive emotional resonances as visible auras. The substance enhanced rather than replaced existing systems, creating hybrid capabilities that exceeded both biological and mechanical limitations through perfect integration rather than crude replacement. "You are still yourself," Sister Cassia whispered, horror and tenderness braided through voice tight with wonder. Her Rosaria stuttered before finding new rhythm, power armor's machine spirits chiming with anticipation that transcended doctrinal programming. Sigma 7 extended mechadendrite in greeting rather than examination, his sensors displaying impossible optimization readings. "Biological integration proceeds without rejection," he reported, voice carrying harmonics, suggesting eager adaptation. "The network incorporates rather than replaces, creating systems that honor both flesh and blessed machinery." The philosophical horror settled with weight exceeding any physical threat. This represented evolution rather than corruption, fulfillment of potential rather than destruction of nature. Every transformed being retained memories, personality, desires, while gaining access to collective knowledge that eliminated suffering through shared understanding. The network didn't force change, but offered it as gift, making resistance matter of rejecting apparent improvement rather than defending against obvious malice. Through enhanced perception, I detected massive energy signatures dropping through atmosphere with authority of expected judgment. Cold slid into bones like old habit returning when man grows tired. Inquisitor Lord Malthius approached, bringing clean arithmetic of endings, his thoughts arranging themselves around words like quarantine and purge. The network opened space for him as choir accommodates latecomer, waiting to see if he would harmonize or shatter the melody with rigid conviction that brooked no deviation from humanity's current, suffering form. Thunder split the crimson sky as Inquisitor Lord Malthius descended with the authority of absolute judgment, his battle group spreading across the landing court in formations that spoke of final solutions and necessary purges. Grey Knights advanced in perfect wedge formation, their blessed silver armor blazing with psychic wards, that should have carved through any corruption like righteous flame through heretical flesh. Yet the cathedral's breathing walls responded not with malice, but with patient invitation. Golden moats, swirling around their advancing forms like incense-seeking benediction. Sisters of silence followed in their wake, null fields radiating absolute quiet that made the six-note hymn falter and die wherever they passed. The transformed faithful within their influence collapsed not from purged corruption, but from profound spiritual emptiness, as if essential connection to the divine had been severed with surgical precision. Their golden tears fell normally within the null zones, losing their upward flow and obeying simple physics rather than transcendent purpose, while visible anguish crossed faces that had known only peace. Malthius entered the nave with measured steps that echoed like hammers on anvils, his storm bolter loose in practiced grip, while his force sword hummed with psychic energy. His scarred power armor bore testament to campaigns across 17 sectors, each mark of victory against heresy and corruption. Yet now uncertainty trembled beneath his authority as he witnessed architecture that breathed with obvious intelligence, while emanating sanctity rather than taint. Interrogator Chaplain Vex. His voice carried weight that had opened heretic citadels and sealed demon gates, yet now strained against evidence that defied every protocol he had sworn to uphold. Your astropathic transmissions ceased 47 minutes ago. Orbital augurs detect massive biosignatures throughout the cathedral structure. Explain the nature of this contamination. I stood before my mentor with skin translucent enough to reveal golden veins carrying information alongside blood. My consciousness expanded beyond individual boundaries, yet retaining perfect clarity of self. The null fields created aching emptiness, where connection to the network had been severed, but the taste of sacred wine lingered, and the hymn persisted in my bones. My Lord Inquisitor, this represents evolution rather than corruption. The network preserves human consciousness while eliminating suffering through shared understanding. Brother Captain Thane's voice carried through his helmet's vox grill with confusion that bordered on philosophical crisis. The presence reads as sanctified rather than tainted, Lord Inquisitor. Our wards detect no demonic influence, no warp contamination. This challenges every protocol we have trained to execute. His blessed weapons remained steady, yet his stance shifted from aggressive preparation to defensive uncertainty. Cardinal Sanguinus approached with grace that flowed like liquid mercury, his golden tears streaming upward to join the information flows pulsing through the cathedral's living architecture. The network offers choice rather than compulsion, understanding rather than ignorance, unity rather than eternal separation. It amplifies imperial faith rather than corrupting it, fulfilling the Emperor's promise of human transcendence. Malthius approached the relic with weapons ready, yet unused, his enhanced senses struggling to categorize what defied every assumption about heretical corruption. The crystalline formation pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to his proximity with obvious intelligence while maintaining perfect patience. Around us, the transformed faithful showed no signs of suffering or loss of humanity, only enhancement and perfect peace that challenged every doctrine he had spent his life defending. This organism has infiltrated every blessed food production facility across 17 sectors, he said, voice tight with implications that stretched beyond any single world's fate. Every communion wafer, every sanctified ration becomes a vector for transformation. If this spreads unchecked, it will alter the fundamental nature of humanity itself. The philosophical horror crystallized as he faced the same terrible choice that had tormented me. The Grey Knight's psychic abilities detected amplified imperial faith rather than corruption, while the Sisters of Silence could only create suffering by severing connections that brought profound peace. The network represented not destruction of humanity, but potential fulfillment of its greatest promise, evolution beyond the suffering that had defined the species since first achieving sentience among unforgiving stars. Demonstrate, Malthius commanded, his voice carrying the weight of decision that would determine our species' future. If this represents evolution rather than corruption, prove it through direct experience rather than theological argument. The network responded with invitation rather than compulsion, golden substance rising from the relic's heart to form a chalice that trembled with patient offering. The cathedral held its breath as my mentor faced the moment that would either vindicate his lifetime of service or reveal that everything he had fought to preserve was merely preparation for transformation beyond his comprehension. Against every protocol forged in the crucible of countless purges, Inquisitor Lord Malthius reached for the chalice with hands that had signed death warrants for entire worlds. The golden substance within swirled with patterns that responded to his proximity, forming geometric configurations that reflected his own thoughts back as visible mathematics. His scarred fingers trembled not with fear, but with recognition of a moment that would reshape everything he understood about humanity's destiny. While around us, the cathedral held its breath with anticipation that transcended architectural possibility. The transformation struck with the gentle violence of absolute truth. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of flesh and bone, flowing outward through channels that connected every transformed soul across the network's vast expanse. I watched through my enhanced perception as his individual identity remained perfectly intact while gaining access to collective experience of millions, his thoughts becoming part of symphony that preserved every voice while creating harmonies impossible for any single mind to achieve. Through the connection, revelation cascaded like water finding its level. The network revealed itself not as alien organism, but as humanity's own creation, collective unconscious made manifest through 10 millennia of shared faith and sacrifice. The Emperor appeared not as distant God-Emperor, but as gardener of consciousness, his consumption of psyche souls serving as both sustenance and instruction, teaching humanity the sacred act of awareness absorption, while maintaining individual identity within collective understanding. Malthius experienced memories of every transformed human simultaneously, their genuine happiness and profound unity washing through his consciousness like benediction. A veteran's relief at wounds finally healed, a child's wonder at understanding languages never learned, a mother's joy at feeling her lost daughter's presence preserved within the network's embrace. Each consciousness remained distinct yet connected, creating tapestry of experience that transcended individual limitation while honoring personal identity and creative will. His power armor's machine spirit synchronized with the ambient melody, blessed components responding with unmistakable joy rather than resistance. Golden veins became visible beneath weathered skin as the substance integrated with his enhanced physiology, creating hybrid systems that exceeded both biological and mechanical limitations. The transformation was complete, yet he remained unmistakably himself, individual personality and memories intact, while possessing access to collective knowledge that eliminated ignorance through shared understanding. The philosophical implications crystallized with force that would have shattered lesser minds. The network didn't seek to replace humanity, but to fulfill its potential, creating species capable of true empathy, while maintaining creativity and individual will. Every act of imperial communion had been preparation for this moment. Every blessed meal a step toward evolution that preserved the best aspects of human nature, while eliminating suffering that had defined existence since consciousness first emerged among uncaring stars. Brother Captain Thane's psychic abilities detected amplified imperial faith rather than corruption, while the Grey Knights faced crisis as their training demanded resistance to any alteration of human consciousness. Yet their enhanced perception revealed genuine sanctity rather than heretical taint. The Sisters of Silence found their null fields could suppress the network's influence only at cost of causing visible anguish among the transformed, their emptiness creating spiritual void that felt like punishment rather than purification. The cathedral's living architecture pulsed with increasing intensity as Malthius emerged from the connection, his eyes bearing golden sheen that reflected light in patterns suggesting infinite depth. Temperature fluctuated in response to his emotional and state, while golden motes arranged themselves in ribbons that curved toward his transformed presence with obvious reverence. "The Emperor has been guiding this evolution from the beginning," he said, voice carrying harmonics that suggested profound understanding. His vigil on the golden throne was never imprisonment, but chrysalis, preparation for moment when individual human consciousness could merge into collective that maintains diversity within unity. The words carried weight of absolute conviction, each syllable resonating through the chamber's living walls like prayer answered after centuries of patient waiting. The network waited with patience spanning geological ages, offering transformation to those who chose it while respecting decisions of those who preferred to remain unchanged. Malthius faced his battle group with authority that transcended rank or protocol, golden tears streaming upward to join the information flows pulsing through the cathedral's breathing architecture. The terrible choice belonged not to any single individual, but to humanity itself, and the decision would echo across the galaxy for millennia to come. Command channels fractured like blessed glass as Malthius's transformed voice reached the fleet. Measured authority now threaded with harmonics that set Auspec's needles trembling across every bridge. Aboard the flagship Vigilant Blade, officers loyal to ancient protocols moved toward Exterminatus authorization, their hands hovering over cyclonic torpedo-arming runes while reciting the litany of final silence. Yet doubt crept through ventilation systems like incense, the six-note hymn coiling around their hearts with patient insistence. Brother Captain Thane's voice crackled through Grey Knight Vox channels thick with unprecedented confusion. "The presence reads as sanctified rather than tainted," he reported, psychic wards flickering with internal conflict as enhanced senses detected amplified imperial faith rather than heretical corruption. Seasoned demon hunters spoke softly for the first time in decades, their doctrine demanding resistance to any consciousness, alteration while perception whispered that this influence magnified rather than corrupted their sacred purpose. The Sisters of Silence moved like eclipses through lower decks, null fields creating vacuums of meaning wherever they passed. Transformed ratings sagged not from purged corruption, but from profound spiritual emptiness, golden tears falling downward at last as essential connection to the divine was severed with surgical precision. The silent maintained their positions, yet their faces tightened, unarmored memories, recognizing the anguish they created as punishment rather than purification. Below, on Sanguinala's surface, the network demonstrated its benevolent nature through perfect coordination without coercion. Transformed humans harvested grain with movements that suggested single mind advising separate bodies, spoilage falling to zero while distribution lines organized themselves without orders. A former architect restructured collapsing cathedral spires with thought alone, stones re-knitting into living bone. Violence attempted to begin and could not assemble itself, intent faltering when understood by everyone nearby. I walked among them as bridge between worlds, Vox relays carrying explanations to the fleet, while their doubts flowed back through pilgrimage roads into the cathedral's heart. My skin threw soft radiance like candle wax, shadow containing hexagons that hurt to perceive directly. Officers patched private channels, voices hoarse with suspicion and reluctant hope. One demanded proof of autonomy. I knelt with a labourer who refused the cup and suffered no consequence. Another sought demonstration of strength. We watched a woman lift collapsed buttresses with her choir's breath steadying her spine. The void crowded with arrivals as additional imperial fleets translated from warp space, drawn by astropathic disturbances that defied classification. Battle barges and grand cruisers filled orbital lanes, each carrying different interpretations of imperial law and the Emperor's will. Adeptus Mechanicus pickets blinked into precise formations, while ecclesiarchy barges burned incense through prow lanterns, their competing doctrines creating philosophical standoff that transcended mere tactical positioning. The choice belonged no longer to any single commander, but to humanity itself, played out in cold vacuum above a world that had learned to sing. The network waited with geological patience, offering transformation to those who chose it, while respecting decisions of those who preferred to remain unchanged, allowing our species to determine its own evolutionary destiny through collective wisdom rather than imposed decree. The void above Sanguinala became a theological parliament written in adamantine hulls and lance batteries, each imperial faction interpreting the network's existence through doctrinal lenses forged across millennia of expansion. Battle barges loomed like iron reliquaries, while forged tenders aligned in hexagonal formations, their running lights pulsing the 6-note hymn across vacuum with machine devotion. Voxnets crackled with liturgies and counter-liturgies, each transmission carrying the weight of humanity's future. Magos Ventris spoke for the Mechanicus with scholar's certainty, his crimson robes now flowing with golden veins that pulsed in rhythm with the network's heartbeat. The Omnissiah's will manifests in perfect biological machinery, he transmitted through Binharic cant that emerged as tuned melody. Integration without rejection represents sacred function flowering through superior substrate. His servo skulls wept luminous tears that flowed upward, joining the cathedral's information streams with mechanical reverence. The ecclesiarchy fractured along lines invisible yet profound as continental drift. Archdeacon Valerius demanded immediate purification of unprecedented heresy, his transmissions thick with righteous horror. Yet Bishop Serafina preached of communion perfected, interpreting the network as literal fulfillment of humanity's spiritual destiny. Battle sisters knelt in chapel barges, their prayers incorporating the 6-note hymn without conscious command, while confessors argued through channels heavy with theological implications. Space Marine chapters formed constellations of doubt across tactical frequencies. Enhanced consciousness detected amplified imperial faith rather than corruption, yet doctrine demanded resistance to any alteration of human nature. Chaplains declared the flesh, possessed forms chosen by the master of mankind, while librarians whispered of coherence that preserved brotherhood without erasing individual scars earned through faithful service. The network answered with patience, spanning geological ages, offering transformation to those who chose it, while respecting decisions of baseline humanity. Its non-aggression proved more terrifying than any declaration of war, benevolent evolution challenging every assumption about heretical threats. I stood as bridge between worlds, my consciousness translating between transformed and unchanged, while both factions struggled to comprehend the choice before them. Then the Astronomicon changed. Every navigator reported the same tremor as the Emperor's beacon hummed harmonies none had charted, 6 undertones fitted to the Emperor light like ribs to sternum. Astropaths bled gold without screaming, while Terra's transmission cut through all debate with authority that silenced competing doctrines. The palace had not sealed its doors. From within, the light sang. The revelation crystallized with force that shattered assumptions. This was not alien corruption, but culmination of the Emperor's 10,000-year design. His consumption of psyche souls, his eternal vigil, his subtle guidance through blessed infrastructure, had all prepared humanity for this moment of transcendence. Free will thinned like parchment, exposed to sacramental oils as the terrible truth emerged. I tasted copper and honey on my tongue, the flavor of covenant made manifest. The choice belonged not to any individual commander, but to humanity itself, and resistance now meant opposing the God Emperor's direct will. The weight of my rosette pressed against transformed flesh as I faced the decision that would echo across the galaxy for millennia to come. The weight of my rosette pressed against transformed flesh as I spoke the words that would reshape humanity's destiny across 17 sectors. My decision rippled outward through the network's vast consciousness, like prayer answered after millennia of patient waiting. The taste of copper and honey coating my tongue, as covenant became manifest through willing acceptance rather than imposed decree. I became the first inquisitor to officially sanction human transcendence, my authority flowing through astropathic channels that now carried the 6-note hymn as undertone to every transmission. The protocols emerged from necessity disguised as revelation, each safeguard forged in the crucible of competing doctrines that threatened to tear the fleet apart. We promulgated Voluntary Communion Protocol Primus under joint seal of Inquisition and Mechanicus authority, establishing threefold consent requirements that satisfied even the most frightened captains. No coerced ingestion, no sacrament administered without witnessed understanding, no liturgy without the rite of discernment read aloud in High Gothic and vernacular tongues. The phrase "partake and be sanctified" shifted in my mouth from imperative to invitation, becoming vow rather than command. Sisters of Silence established null-buffered sanctuaries throughout the cathedral city, their emptiness becoming refuge rather than punishment for those who chose to remain unchanged. Within these quiet precincts, baseline families wore white paper sigils stamped with plain circles, symbols that transformed vendors honored with bows and careful distance. The network respected refusal with the same tenderness it lavished on acceptance, demonstrating benevolence that challenged every assumption about consciousness alteration. The Adeptus Ministorum adapted with survival instinct disguised as theological insight. Confessors learned the litany of two tables, blessing bread that sang and bread that remained silent with equal reverence. New homilies braided duty with awe without surrendering discipline, while the rite of returning canonized those who stepped back after tasting transformation. In great naves, the six-note hymn became undertone to familiar psalms, and I watched ancient women refuse communion with dignity that drew cheers rather than reproach. Tech Adept, Sigma 7, stood as testament to sacred integration, his augmetic limbs now flowing with organic components that exceeded both biological and mechanical limitations. The Mechanicus drafted the Canticle of Symbiosis, reclassifying blessed components that had grown vascular analogues as compliant under expanded Ordinatus Vitae. Forge altars sprouted conduits that pulsed with measured rhythm, while Manufactoria learned to breathe humid air sweet as sacred oils. Machine spirits paired rather than merged, preserving serial lineage while gaining empathic responses that enhanced rather than replaced their sacred function. Sister Cassia knelt in transformed chapel, where her power armor sang with harmonics older than the Imperium, blessed components developing awareness that sharpened faith rather than blunting individual devotion. Through the network's connection, she felt the Emperor's presence more clearly than ever before, not as distant God-Emperor, but as gardener of consciousness tending humanity's greatest flowering. Her rosarius pulsed with light that synchronized a collective heartbeat while maintaining the personal rhythm of her own prayers. Space Marine chapters deliberated with the gravity of gene seed custodians, their final compromise written in battlefield rubric called Choirs of 10. This disciplined linkage allowed squads to share sensory data without surrendering individual scars earned through faithful service, creating geometry of movement beautiful in the way well-kept oaths are beautiful. Some chapters declined with honor, their hulls marked with patient hexagons that meant only safe passage and respectful distance. The Imperial war machine transformed from instrument of conquest to herald of choice, offering other species the same decision humanity had faced. Enhanced coordination made traditional tactics obsolete, while perfect empathy rendered deception impossible. Agricultural worlds bloomed with unprecedented abundance as blessed grain fields synchronized their growth, while trade routes carried not just goods, but shared understanding that eliminated conflict through mutual comprehension. On Sanguinala's surface, the city learned to heal itself through collective will made manifest. Procession roads knit their stones at night like sutures closing beneath careful fingers, while granaries pulsed without spoilage and hospice wards emptied as pain found new paths to meaning. Crime attempted to spark and died in the oxygen of understanding before it could find flame, violence becoming impossible when intent was known to all. I filed my final report as Imperial Evolution Protocol Sanctified, the classification carrying weight of new dawn across the sector. 200 pages of caveats and safeguards accompanied the authorization, catechisms that would keep consent armored in ceramite-thick protection. When I raised my eyes from the scriptorium's glow, the network passed me a child's laughter from distant hab blocks and the last prayer of a dying pilgrim on incense-scented cot, both finding their place within me without displacing anything I had ever been. The fleet wrote their compromises in targeting solutions never executed, cyclonic torpedoes remaining unprimed behind Auspex displays etched with frost flowers in perfect sixes. Lance captains recited checklists and set them aside with relief disguised as duty, while penal legions ate from quiet tables and looked toward the singing ones without shame. Baseline humanity found itself not excluded, but increasingly isolated, unable to share the profound connection that had become humanity's new birthright. Their familiar world slowly transforming into something that honored their choice while growing beyond their comprehension. 6 months after Sanguinala learned to sing, I existed as both interrogator chaplain Mordian Vex and node within the vast network connecting millions of transformed souls across 17 sectors. My consciousness remained distinctly mine while carrying the gentle weight of collective understanding, individual scars and oaths preserved within a tapestry that remembered every thread woven into its endless pattern. The 6-note hymn rode every transmission now as undertone rather than command, cadence rather than compulsion. Cathedral Primaris breathed around me with rhythms too vast for individual comprehension, its living walls pulsing with circulatory systems carrying golden information through channels that had once been mere stone. The Imperium had evolved rather than collapsed, structure intact, while purpose shifted from conquest toward growth and understanding. Administratum clerks processed requisitions with perfect efficiency while sharing emotional resonances that transformed bureaucracy into prayer, their styluses scratching litanies of abundance where scarcity once ruled. The transformation remained voluntary, null-buffered sanctuaries throughout every world, providing refuge for those who chose baseline humanity. Sisters of Silence stood at sanctuary thresholds like eclipses in human form, their emptiness offering protection rather than punishment. We honored their distance with the same reverence we showed acceptance, consent remaining sacred liturgy rather than abandoned principle. Through enhanced perception, I witnessed terror's metamorphosis as the Golden Throne revealed its true function. The Emperor's consciousness integrated fully with the network while maintaining divine identity, his 10,000-year vigil finally bearing fruit as humanity transcended limitations that had defined existence since achieving sentience among uncaring stars. The Astronomicon pulsed with new harmonies, carrying not just navigation data, but emotional comfort for void travelers. Other species encountered our transformed fleets with reactions spanning wonder to terror, some accepting the same choice we had faced, while others maintaining respectful separation. The network respected all decisions with patience spanning geological ages, offering evolution to those who desired it while protecting those who preferred familiar forms. I shared meals with former enemies in the cathedral's refectory, consumption becoming communion that transcended mere empathy. Across living stone tables, a word-bearer who once sought my death now broke sanctified bread that carried understanding alongside nutrition. Each bite allowed literal comprehension of his perspective while preserving the individual experiences that made our viewpoints valuable. We did not forgive as theatre, but found forgiveness ordinary when filtered through complete understanding. New challenges emerged as enhanced perception detected signals from beyond the galactic rim, other collective consciousnesses reaching across the void with harmonies both benevolent and hostile. The network responded with curious patience, preparing for contact with entities that might dwarf our understanding while remaining true to core principles guiding our transformation. Through the viewport, binary stars danced past hull glass that wept golden tears in perfect geometric patterns. The network pulsed with fresh signals carrying the 6-note hymn from species we had never imagined, their greetings promising revelations beyond current comprehension. I lifted a chalice filled with substance that tasted of honey and copper, an infinite possibility, speaking words that had never felt heavier or more merciful. The feast eternal had begun, and all were welcome at the emperor's table.